Right. So once again, thank you for being here for our SA Expat Human Resources panelist. My name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I'm now going to turn it over to this fantastic panel to introduce themselves. For the introductions, if you all could say your name, your current title, and then what your background in higher education student affairs is. And we'll start with Heather.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Heather Cruz, and my current title is I'm the HR manager at the Partnership for Public Service, which is a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. My background is primarily res life and housing, but I got there, I kind of a winding path where I got there, worked as a traveling consultant for sorority, then I worked in institutional research for 3 years, then I worked in a counseling center for a year, was a live-on res life for 3 years, housing assignments for 5 years, and then HR for a housing office.
Hi everyone, I'm Carrie Grogan. I'm the Director of Learning and Development at Ratio Architects. I started as the Learning and Development Coach and then made that shift at the start of this year. My background is primarily student involvement, so programming, student leadership, but really a focus in that like activities realm. I worked at both public and private institutions here in the city of Chicago, but also in more like rural town and gown locations as well.
Hi everyone, my name is Shimina Harris. I am, sorry, I thought I paused for just a second. My current title is Talent and HR Manager at Safe and Sound, which is a nonprofit in San Francisco, California. My background was in student affairs was residence life, the housing, so on the business side, student conduct, student support services, and then kind of a generalist in the associate dean's role.
Oh, Jessica, you're muted, Jessica.
Thank you. That mute button gets me every time. My name is Jessica Rollins. I have about 10 years or so working in higher education. I've worked in mostly the academic services side, serving as a student success coach, an academic advisor, and then also a program coordinator for a living learning community. And then I transitioned into a more corporate setting, working as a talent and marketing coach for Bloomin' Brands. And then now, just about 6 weeks ago, just started as an HR generalist with Oasis, which is a Paychex company working in human resources, benefits, and also payroll.
And I am Mallory Sylvester, and I'm a campus recruiting associate, also known as campus development manager at KPMG, which is one of the big 4 accounting firms. Working in higher education, I did a brief stint in admissions, but primarily worked on campus in Greek life, as well as worked for a sorority national headquarters before making the switch to public accounting.
Awesome. Well, it's great because it sounds like we've got quite a bit of diversity even within the HR realm too on this panel. So I'm really excited to hear what y'all have to say. And we're going to start by talking about your the transferable skills that you brought into your current role. So tell us a little bit about what your responsibilities are, and then what transferable skills from student affairs you use to complete those roles. So we'll start with Carrie for this one.
Yeah, so as far as transferable skills go, when I've had these conversations with other folks, I have very often stated that my conversations with students are very similar to the conversations I have now with full-time staff. Basically, my job remains the same, but my students look very different. And so it is having coaching conversations with them about how to work with coworkers, how to lead, how to work through conflict, how to embrace vulnerability and share aspects of yourself and get to know people in a really genuine nature. And so the leadership development and student involvement work that I was doing is absolutely correlates to my day-to-day work. I am doing far more big picture strategic thinking that I used to do, but that work that I would, plot out a program long term and think about what it would look like in year 2 and year 3, that is absolutely something that I'm still doing on a very regular basis. The supervision experience and skill set that I was doing, I now build in, but especially with working with volunteers, so staff members who are serving on my committees and just trying to coach them along through that role and keep them motivated is a big part of what I do. But really, it's, I think, that openness to talk about people, about their cares and concerns, and help them find their solutions. That is my everyday role and responsibility.
Thanks, Carrie. Shimina, what's your experience like?
So my day-to-day, I am the sole HR person. I have a temp part-time right now, but I'm the sole HR person. Nonprofits, about, if we were fully staffed, we'd be at 55, which is tiny compared to where I was in higher ed, a large public institution. So everything that happens in the organization that runs through. So I have a hand in payroll, which is, I will say now is my least favorite part, but I contribute to payroll to make sure it gets done. Benefits administration, onboarding, offboarding, recruiting, coaching, discipline. So anything that you can think of related to human resources falls in my court, or it flows through me. I think the skills that have been the most transferable are the ability to be a broken record, because I find myself saying the same thing over and over again with people who have supervised for a long time, but seemingly not supervised well. There's a lot of corralling of information and building systems. In the nonprofit space, I found that things just seemed to happen and there was no documentation, no one wrote anything down. So I spent probably the first 6 months writing about 5 or 6 policies of how we actually do hiring, how we do background checks and things like that, because there was a lot of, in my old life, it would have been institutional knowledge, but a lot of, someone's been there 20 years and this is just how we do it. So my job was to codify that, which sounds fancy, but being able to write things down, talk to the person, talk to my CEO the same level as I talk to our most entry-level assistants, and be able to deliver the message in a way that's accessible for most folks, for me has been probably the most helpful.
That's great. Thank you so much. And then Jessica, let's hear about your transferable skills.
Sure. I think I always joke that I felt like working in student services sometimes I was herding cats, or just trying to get people all together when there's some type of fire. I feel like, especially we've had a huge focus on COVID. I work with a lot of business leaders, and with COVID that's been our central focus right now, on how do you take care of your people, but also how do you take care of your business and the balance there. With working in student services, there was a lot about policies and procedures, helping them understand what that policy looks like. And I'm starting to do a lot more of that in my current position of, this is what, the law says about X, Y, and Z, and how do you apply it to your business, and working with some of our leaders there. I think another part of it is developing people. I think that's something across the board we'll all see of, it's either developing a new manager, a business leader, on how to then develop their people and have some of those conversations on performance feedback, how to just be, I love how you said, to be a human in front of your people, that employment engagement piece as well. But right now, the biggest focus since I've started has been helping our clients, as we call them, really understand how they can take care of their people, with in the back of the mind the fear of that their business could go away tomorrow because of what's happening in the world today.
Great. Thank you so much, Jessica. Mallory, we'll have you share your experiences next.
Yeah, so working in higher education, especially with Greek life, I worked a lot with helping student groups to do recruitment and recruit new members. So working at KPMG, I am assigned to a number of schools that I'm responsible for recruiting interns from. So I really just took the teaching that I did with students and, helping them develop those recruiting skills and finding members that really, match the values of their organization, and have transferred that to doing it for a large organization. And I also work really closely with career centers. So I am very close to my counterparts in both the undergrad and graduate school offices. So working with them to find great students who want to go into public accounting, who, if we do see students, being able to bring different programs to campus, a lot of that's going to revolve around soft skill development. So I bring staff members who are probably going to be, hopefully their counterparts someday, and they'll teach them, what it looks like to work in public accounting, things like that. So really, like, my goal is just to recruit students as well as help them develop the skills that they're going to need to be an intern and to really succeed in a large corporation. So, coaching, different things like that really transferred well.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Heather, we'll have you close us out on this question.
Sure. So kind of similar to Shimina, I'm also a department of one. I'm a generalist. And so I have to do all HR for an office of between 120, 130 people, which is a lot for one HR person. I do everything from payroll, benefits, talent acquisition, the onboarding, the offboarding, performance management, the legal compliance and audits and policy, to manage the HR technology we use, DEI stuff, talent and culture issues, employee engagement. So all of those things, so many of those topics could just be one job in itself. But when you're a generalist, you have to do everything and just keep it moving. And so the biggest thing for me, the transferable skill, was actually managing multiple tasks, in the sense that I can relate it most to being a residence director. When I was a residence director, you're doing a lot of things at one time. You're supervising, you're doing programming, you're doing student conduct, you're on all these committees, you're being asked to fill a lot of roles at one time. And so to me, that's very similar being an HR generalist, is just that sometimes, you can't do every single thing to perfection. You have to just kind of keep them all moving, because in a single day, you could be having a really rich conversation about, supervision or someone's performance. And then the next thing you know, you're answering questions about, somebody has a question about health insurance and Medicare. And then the next thing you know, someone has a former employee has a question about unemployment benefits. And then the next thing you know, you're being asked for, like, hey, I need data I need all the people that did this 3 years ago, and I need it in an hour. So for me, it's just the managing multiple tasks, not knowing what's coming, because you can have tasks where you work with people, and then you have tasks where I'm engrossed in a spreadsheet that will take like a week to figure out, and then you have people coming to you with questions. And so being able to just really manage everything at one time and keep it going.
Great, thank you so much. I saw Shimina shaking her head a lot when you were speaking about that as well. So actually, Shimina, I'm going to start this question with you and ask you about the learning gaps that existed within your first year. So we talked a lot about transferable skills, but what did you have to kind of make up for, and how did you do that in your first year on the job?
Yeah, so I had a very small stint doing some HR work on the business side of housing. And I thought that was real HR work. It turns out it really wasn't. So part of the learning curve was getting a sense of what the actual HR tasks were, and figuring out, like, I know how to figure out like Maxient, I can figure that out. So then how do I figure out ADP? So that, which is a payroll software, and it does a number of other things as well. So a lot of it was like learning and patience with myself. I am a learn by doing. So I would go in, mess something up, then I'd have to figure out how to fix it. I didn't really have a community there. So I asked my supervisor, I was reporting to a CEO at the time, who's a white woman. I said, I need you to introduce me to Black women who are in the nonprofit space so that I can find community. I didn't actually need them to do anything specific to HR. I just needed to know that I wasn't alone, being Black is an important part of my identity. So some of this you just get in, it's a new job. It's like going to a new campus. You're like, where do people eat? Where do you park? How do you do those things? So for me, the learning curve wasn't necessarily very different. It was just a different environment. Although I did have to learn like the business of what my nonprofit does. Our mission is to prevent child abuse in the country, basically across the country. But I had to figure out, what do we actually do? We have all these teams. I don't know what people do when they go in the classroom. I'm not sure how the counseling session works. How do we connect them to resources if they're an undocumented person? Like, how do we do those things? So for me, it was learning the business, if you will, of what we do, so that when I'm talking to, either potential interns or potential new hires, I knew what we actually did, and I didn't have to pass them off. So the technical pieces were kind of the easy part, and they took time, but actually learning the business, because I was so entrenched in higher education that I had to like just take the hat off altogether and get something altogether new.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Shimina. Jessica, what were the gaps that you had? And I know you've got a new job very recently, so I'm not sure if you want to speak about that or past experience, but whatever works.
Yeah, so I think so this is my second role since leaving higher education. And I think with any new role, I worked in restaurants before. So it was using the technology, understanding the terms. I think we see that in any role that we have. I think for me right now, the HRGs that I work with, every department, I feel for Heather and Shimina because our company has different people for those different roles, thank the Lord, because I couldn't do all the things that you're doing, but just learning like the regulations of what federal, state, local laws look like. You can't just give an answer about your feelings. So just making sure that the facts versus the feelings, it's a lot of that. Learning, I was not, as much as I worked in student services, I was really all about my students and making sure they had a great time. But some of the admin tasks of really having to learn Excel a lot more has been a huge a learning curve for me. So YouTube and I have become very close with that. And then just also, learning the lingo. So I spend a lot of time shadowing as much as I can virtually with my other coworkers on what are they saying to clients, how do they answer their questions. There's still a lot of gray there. So I think from my last job versus this one, it's just really like learning that environment and learning the lingo of what people are saying and how they do things. So I think with all of us, it's the people part we love and we got that down, but it's just the technical pieces that I know for me has been the biggest part, a biggest challenge.
Thank you, Jessica. Mallory, what about with university recruiting? What were the skills gaps that you had there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my second role in public accounting. So really the first thing I learned is that public accounting is a very vast career, and there's a lot of terms, a lot of different things that a recruiter needs to know, because especially going on campus and talking to a student, they're going to come and talk to you about, well, my major is accounting or my major is finance. What can I do with that major? So being able to point them to different areas of the company that they're going to fall into, because a lot of times certain jobs have to, require certain majors, and it's just not something that we make exceptions for. So being well versed enough in the business majors to be able to give that guidance to students, and that takes a lot of learning and training. I was even a business major myself, and it took a little while to pick that up. Accounting terms in general, understanding the difference between like tax versus audit is something that you have to go out and talk to students about. I found at the beginning it was really like fake it till you make it. But really I just tried to, anytime I could sit in on any type of talk about tax or audit, whatever it was, I really tried to do that as much as possible, just so I could be more familiar. So if a student said something to me, I at least somewhat knew what they were talking about.
Thanks, Mallory. Let's see, Heather, what was your skills gaps that you filled in?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat similar. I mean, Shimina and Jessica hit on some of it. I think making the transition from higher ed, a lot of the soft skill stuff, a lot of us, feel kind of comfortable with, stuff related to performance management and training development, even some of talent acquisition. But when you're in a role like a generalist role, Shimina hit it on the head before. I was the HR person my last year for a housing department, but what you were doing in HR for a student affairs department is not like actual HR at all, because when things would come to us in that role, we'd be like, oh, you need to go to big HR for the university. Like, we didn't handle any of that stuff. And so for me, the learning curve was I had to learn a lot of information. I suddenly am the benefits administrator, like the benefits administrator for all benefits, for all insurance, for 401ks, for FSAs, for HSAs, for life insurance, for disability insurance. I wasn't handling any of that in student affairs. So and all those things are very, very regulated. So you have to learn a lot of laws. They're a big part of the job if you're a generalist. Payroll and benefits are big. While a lot of us, while I would love to spend a lot more time on performance management and talent acquisition and training, that's probably the smallest part of my job, not because it's not important, but because payroll and benefits take a lot of time to do it really well, and legal compliance and data and audits and all that stuff takes up a lot of time. So my biggest learning curve was having to learn all of that. I had to learn it by, I'm more of a, I think also somebody said they learn by doing. I was the same way. I learned by doing. I had to just look up a lot of things. I had to do a lot of Googling on how different, benefits works. And I had to, read a lot of HR newsletters and employment law blogs and whatnot. Luckily, we had a really patient insurance broker that I worked with who taught me a lot. And within my first year, I took the SHRM certification prep course, and I did get my SHRM CP within my first year on the job. So that was huge, was taking that SHRM class. The other big piece of my first year, not necessarily a learning curve, was was imposter syndrome. I had huge imposter syndrome because I'm working with people who had worked in this field. They weren't the HR person, but worked in this field for a long time. And the work my office does is our mission is it's a nonpartisan organization with the mission to improve the federal government. They can improve its management, improve its hiring practices, get more young people into the federal government. So we're also work with all these really high level government leaders. They're in our office. We talk to them, people whose names you see in the news, people you see on TV. Within my month working there, was onboarding a former elected official from another state. And it was just like, oh my gosh, I barely know what I'm doing. And I'm onboarding like a former congressperson. And so huge imposter syndrome. But I mean, within time, you got over it when you realize that they aren't any better than you are. Once you realize oh, they're not any smarter than I am. They just happen to have these roles and happen to be on TV. And so you get over it.
Thank you, Heather. Carrie, anything to add from your experience?
Yeah, so I was hired to do emotional intelligence coaching and leadership development, and that has really quickly expanded to all aspects of employee engagement and employee experience. So culture, professional development training, internal communications, creating an equity, diversity, and inclusion response team, initiative, etc. I saw in the chat some questions about anti-racist initiatives that your organization is doing, and I think that's my biggest thing to add. I think hinting on that imposter syndrome is that suddenly I'm the go-to for all things in a way that I'm like, none of you have done this. Okay, sure, I will pretend that I can, and I will figure it out, and I will pull on resources to learn this together. And I think working in a higher ed environment, there was always someone else to at least partner with. Even if you didn't just, kick it over to a different team, you could at least work in partnership with another department to pull something off if you weren't an expert. And now I am the expert. So I'm speaking to these topics. I'm creating initiatives that I don't fully feel the most experienced to do, but I'm the most experienced at that company to do it. And so I better learn and know what the hell I'm doing and figure it out. So it's really having confidence to make moves and also being capable of selling those ideas. I've gotten a lot of support from our management and partnership team to do what I feel is right, which is so cool and so great to be empowered to say our company needs to be doing X, Y, and Z to make a difference, to make a change. But also I then need to be confident to say, this is what our organization needs to be doing. It's not someone else's idea or job anymore, it's mine.
Great, thank you so much for adding that, Carrie. I want to ask just one or two to speak, and you can let me know if you feel anything about this, but if you spoke about imposter syndrome and you felt like you had to kind of really learn, can you talk a little bit about how your organizations responded in that? Because I think that is something that we see a lot in the expat group, is people having fear of mistakes that we bring with us from our student affairs background and how our leadership responds to that. But then there's been so many posts of people saying, I made a mistake and it was fine and everything, was so much more healthier than it was in student affairs. Would anyone want to speak about the relationship they had with their supervisor or leadership team as they went through their learning process?
I mean, I can definitely start. That was I literally have it written on my paper, imposter syndrome, before you even said it. So thank you, Heather, for bringing that up. Going into a new field where you know nothing, and one, I think we all struggled in student affairs telling people what our jobs are or were. And so with our own families and our own friends, right? So when you're going into a new field and people are like, you're coming from education, you were a teacher? No, that wasn't my job. So I think I've had great bosses. We've had some honest conversations of they saw the people side, the personable side of me, the soft skills, and those were things that their teams were lacking. So that worked in my favor. But we had some really honest conversations where I was vocal enough to say, I don't know what I don't know. I'm going to bug you with all the questions, but this is also where I want to be. And let's just have a conversation of expectations, of where I'm at, the knowledge gap. So I think I've had some great, supervisors. Even my current supervisor during my interview, she's like, you're really not qualified for this job, but I think you, and she said that to me, and I was very appreciative of that. But she saw something in me where I could grow and I could develop because I was very honest. And I think those are the things that when you're having conversations with your supervisors, they hired you for a reason. They picked you for a reason. So I think we have to be better about understanding that they chose us. But that self-talk, or even us working in higher ed where you don't always get the pat on the back or the recognition, these people are here to work, to make money. There's a business and they want the best of the best and they see something in you. And I think I've had great supervisors who will come to me and say, this is where I need you to be. Let's make a plan on how we can get there. But every day I'm like, they made a mistake because I don't know what I'm doing. But it's been really great to be able to have those conversations with my supervisors early on in one-on-ones, and they're very big on development of people. So I think that's how it's worked best for me. But I'm very honest. I know what I know, but I'm eager to learn. And I think that's what people are looking for, people who are willing and eager to do a great job. And I know for us to make money, so those are some things that are in our spaces as well.
I think being in leadership or in learning and development, part of the goal is to learn and to help others feel like it's a safe space to learn. And so a lot of my role has also been role modeling mistakes and owning those mistakes. And so when I've screwed up, when I don't know the answer, it's being very frank and clear about that, because it gives permission to people who have never thought they could be vulnerable in that way, and it has role modeled that even when it's deeply uncomfortable.
Is it okay if I chime in real quick?
Of course, yeah.
I think I had imposter syndrome probably for about a week, and then I got into my first meeting and realized that nobody knew what I was supposed to do anyway. They were like, yeah, that makes sense. So there's a place of finding a little bit of confidence, because you realize like these people don't know what I'm supposed to do. They want to make sure they get paid, and they want to make sure that their benefits are accessible. All the other stuff, kind of like Heather said before, like all the other stuff, like I wish I had more time to focus on performance management and learning and development, to be honest. But I'm like, I have like the bread and butter pieces that I have. And I would say the other thing with that is, I remember that because if you looked on paper, I probably wasn't qualified for my job, and that's fine. But my supervisor, I won't even say what she said, because that would be awkward. And I'm gonna say what she said. She said it. She was like, "You really are high on the emotional intelligence piece." She's like, "And I'm not really strong in that, and I think I need you." And so for me, I was like, "Here we go. Like, let's do this." And so. I remember a call that we were on, and she introduced me as her head of people. And I'm thinking, that's not even my title, but okay. Like, you just run with it sometimes. Like, take what you know and start to apply that. And I found that if I don't know the answer, which is a lot of the time, I say, I do the pretend look like, I have an initial response, but let me confirm what I'm thinking, and I'll circle back with you in the next day or so. That works. People love that. And then when you actually close the loop, they're like, yes, this person is reliable. But I learned that no one knew what I was really supposed to be doing. And so that gave me the freedom to learn. I could make mistakes. I would tell my supervisor and share just for the learning part of it. But I said, they don't know what you're supposed to be doing. So ride that and enjoy it while you can. And then when you start to perform and do well, people are like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this person was supposed to do this, or that this was part of your role.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Okay, I'm actually going to shift us to the job search now because that's what I see a lot of the questions in the chat coming in as. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw a lot of questions out there. And whatever speaks to you about what you want to share, let us know. We won't have a chance for everyone to speak on all of these topics, but I want to make sure and get to as many of them as possible. So I'm going to start, since Jessica, you could us off on the last one, I'm going to start with Mallory for this. So here's some of the ideas I have for us to talk about the job search. So in the chat, there's conversations about certifications. Do you recommend a certification or not? There's also a question about moving to a specialist role or a generalist role when you're moving into an HR field. Other questions about can you move up, or do you usually have to take a lateral position, or do you even have to take a lower level position and grow? I'm also just kind of curious about, like, what do you have to do to your materials? What was the interview process like? So again, there's a lot of different things, but let's just move and start talking about the job search, and we can see how the questions go and what you all have to share. So Mallory, why don't you get us started on this?
Sure, and I can kind of hit a couple of those in mind. So the job search for me, moving from working for a national sorority headquarters to working in campus recruiting, I obviously went the very specialist route. I knew that a lot of people that I talked to who previously were in Greek life ended up falling into campus recruiting because it was kind of a natural shift of, still being able to recruit students and work with them. So I specifically looked for campus recruiting roles. And to me, in the interview process, it was really easy to talk about, well, I helped an organization of 300 members recruit 75 new members out of a pool of 1,500. So things like that I was able to quantify to show that I am able to go onto a campus and help, get those metrics, because especially working for KPMG, I mean, it is numbers. There are specific numbers we have to hit, and so that's just the way. And I was kind of shocked when I did get into recruiting that you see that a lot more. With regards to a lateral move, when I was working for the sorority headquarters, I was at a manager level, and I took a step back to an associate. But knowing that you can typically move up higher in recruiting roles, so that was fine with me. I also figured I'd probably be making a bit more money, so it didn't really bother me as much to take that step back. For the certification, I made that in the first year of the new HR job that I had as one of my goals. So the company I worked for paid for it. And that's the reason why I ended up getting it. Honestly, working in campus recruiting, I don't necessarily find that I need it. I have had some students ask some very specific HR questions that I was able to kind of like identify and be like, all right, I know that I can't answer that. I'm going to need to go to our HR people to have them better answer that question. So that was a quick response to a lot of those.
Yeah, that's a great start. Thank you so much, Mallory. We'll go to Heather now.
You're muted, Heather.
Thank you. I was job searching for about a year before I landed my job, and I mean, it was frustrating because I was getting kind of desperate to get out. Because I'm in Washington D.C., I was primarily focusing first on the federal government, and that's really hard in the sense that while there's a ton of hiring, my resume wasn't, now in hindsight, I know my resume wasn't quite set up the right way to get a federal government job. I know better now, but for me, I wanted to work primarily in either nonprofit or association. At that point I didn't really want to make the jump into like a corporate environment quite yet, coming out of education. So that's how I focused my search. But it did take about a year until I landed my job. In terms of my search, when I took my position, it was advertised as HR generalist. And so I really didn't know what career level it was coming in, because generalist is such a general term. When I was leaving the university, I was like a manager / assistant director level, and it was a really big department. So assistant director was like about 3 levels in. When I made the transition, my pay, I know there were some questions about pay in there. My pay was about the same from when I was leaving education, but I got so much more back in terms of that. So for me, it wasn't because I was at a point where I was really kind of desperate to leave, I was okay just kind of keeping the same pay because I got back so much more in just terms of quality of life. My commute was shorter just based on where I was living. So it was worth it to me to make that switch. Even though it is a nonprofit, it's still kind of like the private sector, depends so much on performance. So if you're performing, you're going to get raises and you're going to get promotions. And so I've been there 4.5 years. My salary is close to doubled in 4 years. And so, even if it's not private sector, there still is opportunity to advance, get promotions, get raises, etc. In terms of, trying to think, interview process, so quick compared to education. Oh my goodness, so fast. I found the posting, submitted my resume and application over the weekend. I heard from them on like Tuesday or Wednesday with let's set up a phone screen. I had a phone screen 2 days later, and then like the day after the phone screen, I heard back and said we'd like to bring you in for an interview. And an interview like 3 days later. The interview was 1 hour with like 2 people and another hour with 1 person. And then like the next day was like a job offer. So, I mean, the whole thing from application to job offer was probably like 2.5 weeks.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate that. We will move then to Carrie. And so I just want to tell everyone, Carrie shared her resume with me previously, maybe months ago or something. And so I'm hoping you'll maybe talk about your switch to a functional resume too, because I found that to be super useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was thinking about switching out of higher ed and student affairs, I did informational interviews with people because this Facebook group didn't exist yet. So I just perused my LinkedIn contacts and found folks and called and used their advice and switched my resume to functional. It's posted in that resources link, the resume that I used when applying. So feel free to take a look and follow up if you have questions. But I really organized it based on the types of roles I was applying for to show that I had project director experience, to show that I could present and organize learning and development. It was really just using the terms that were in job applications to describe the work I was already doing. When I thought about what was most important to me in my student affairs work and how I wanted that to translate, it was those like one-on-ones with student leaders, AKA executive coaching for college students. I loved that work. I loved transformational leadership development experiences. And so I made that the focus of my resume, my cover letter, and my job search. And that is still my favorite part of my work, even though it has hugely expanded beyond just that. I found my position through LinkedIn. It was about a 6-month process of looking for positions, having some phone interviews. But from when I started and really dedicated myself to looking for this and then getting the position that I landed in, it was about 6 months. That was pre-COVID, I want to acknowledge. But to me, I kind of set that goal and really stuck with it. The position that I moved to, I don't know if I would describe it as lateral. I don't supervise anyone, but that's because HR is my supervisor and me. And so there's not a team to supervise, but I am on the management team of the organization, which is only 14 people out of 170. So I'm probably in a higher ranked position, but I don't supervise, which is a weird. Is it lateral? Is it higher? I think it's higher. I don't know. But when it came to pay, I was searching for Glassdoor and different tools to try and figure out what to ask for, because they didn't post and they didn't know, and the position was new. So they were really relying on me to dictate what my pay would be. And my white male husband, with all of his gung-ho confident energy, was like, boo, you tell them 6 figures. And I was like, hell no. I'm vomiting at the idea of that. I did not get that, but I got damn near close and got a 40% pay increase from what I was getting in student affairs. And so to me, it was the combination of my research, advocating for myself, and having a hell of a great cheerleader telling me I was worth it, to be able to advocate for that pay. I think that's all the unique things I have to contribute.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. Shimina, talk to us about your transition.
So I ended up getting my PHR while I was still in higher ed. I have a good way of hustling. So the university paid for, I took a 12-week prep course, which means I left work every Wednesday at like 4 to go to, and they paid for it. So I was like, okay, you said yes, all I had to do was ask. So I had my PHR, I got my PHR December 17th of 2018. I don't know why I know that so specifically, but I started applying after the holidays in January. For about a week, I realized I can be impatient as well. So for like a week, I wasn't getting any hits and I was like, this doesn't work for me. And so one of my former students who worked for me is now a career coach, and he does like coaching on the side and does people's resumes, and he offered to do mine for free. And so he changed mine from a chronological to a functional, and I got 3 hits like within 2 days. And I ended up taking all of the phone interviews because I was just so excited. But the process was fairly easy. I think, like Heather said, it was fast. Where I am now, I think I applied like on a Saturday. Monday morning, I had an email. Tuesday, I was on a call with the CEO, and then I think I was on site on that Friday. The interview process was messy. They hadn't had an HR person for a minute. And so I was there all day. I had like an hour break, which was the catalyst of me writing a policy of how we were going to do it moving forward. And I gave the feedback at the time. I was like, you could really tighten this up. Even if I'm not the person, I'd happily consult with you on this for a fee. Or if I am, then I would rewrite this differently. And then I got offered the job at a salary that I was not willing to take. 'Cause I was already in the 6 figures in higher ed, and I'm in California. So if you're like, wow, 6 figures in higher ed, California, things look quite different than most places. And so it would have been a significant cut. And to be honest, the recruiter that reached out to me, because they were using a firm, she told me the salary, and I heard what she said, and I didn't even think about it. I heard, and I was like, I would never leave for that. And so I just took that. I was like, okay, so that's the lowest you would go. So I came back. I think I was the first person that had negotiated with them, because it took them a week to get back with me, because it's a nonprofit. So they had to get my salary approved by the board, and that took some time. I don't know if it was a lateral move. I was an associate dean when I left the university, and now I'm the talent and HR manager. But I will be honest, within the first 3 months, they asked me to be on the leadership team. And then my caveat was, and I can be really bold with my request. And I said, when you have an opportunity to revisit your finances and you can bring me up to this level, then I would be happy to consider being on the leadership team. And somehow they miraculously found the money. So then I got to very quickly get back into the 6 figures where I am quite comfortable. So it was happy. It wasn't hard. I had to certainly be brave with like my ask and know that I was worth it. And I was also willing to walk away if they were going to mess around. First of all, I wasn't going to go to any meetings that I wasn't being paid and compensated for, in addition to all of my other work. And I knew that, and I was ready. I talked with my wife, and we were like, well, if they can't do this, then keep looking. Like, there was other interest in these other places, so you can do that. So I was ready and willing to walk away if they weren't going to be able to meet that. So I know not everybody has the ability to do that, but I had prepared quite some time before that to both take a pay cut, but then expect to be back where I was when I left higher ed. But I knew I needed to learn stuff and prove myself in a bit of a way. I feel like there was another question you asked, but I'll stop there.
I think that's a good place, and we'll definitely be able to come back and ask some more about that as we get the questions in. So thank you, Shimina. Jessica, you'll have you close out this question about your switch and the interview process and your resume and making the move laterally or not, all of that.
Sure. My move was pretty lateral, but even with the lateral move, it was way more money than I was making in education. My first job out of higher education, I traveled 85% of the year. So I made more money. I got a lot of points to use for my personal time. I didn't pay for anything 85% of the year. So for me, although it was lateral, I think sometimes salary is great. It was definitely more, but all those extra bonus and perks that came with it. I worked for a fast casual company. So I ate for free all across the country. So there were so many perks, met really great people, traveled around the country on someone else's dime places I would have never been. So I am always very appreciative of that first experience that I had coming right outside of higher ed. And then when they said you get a raise just because it's a new year, or you get a bump and then you get a bonus because you did your job. And I'm going to be very transparent. For me, I was like, what's a bonus? Like, I don't understand what you mean. And so our HR person had to really explain it to me, because you get to keep your job. Congratulations at your performance eval. So for me, that job, although it was technically a lateral move, so many perks, so many great experiences. That got old, of traveling and being on a plane every Monday morning. In my new role, it's technically I am bottom man on the totem pole, but they're paying for my certification. I'm learning, I have a great supervisor who is really feeding into me, and we've talked about where I want to be. And the good thing about my company that I work for, those conversations have to happen within the first 90 days. And they have a career plan that they put you on that has to be checked. And so, and honestly, for my job search, I would just say the people in your circle is everything. So for both positions I got is for jobs that I didn't even apply for. Someone came to me and said, hey, we have this new position, or we have this opening. I think you would be great. And I said, okay, just send me your resume. I didn't even apply. I applied after I got the job, just as a formality. And so I would just say really utilizing your circle is going to be really big in your job search. I did in my previous position, I got laid off right before COVID, but was already planning my exit because I was tired of traveling. And so I had an insider who put me in front of one of their recruiters, and that recruiter literally passed my resume to 10 other departments. And I had multiple interviews within the company I work for now. And it was a matter of me choosing what I wanted to do. So I have a great circle of people who knew I was looking, but also I love my people, my squad, and they were looking out for me. And so I would just say, even with LinkedIn became my best friend in the sense of I spent more time on LinkedIn. If you have like an Apple phone, it shows you what you spend most of your time on. I started to spend more time on LinkedIn than Facebook or Instagram or anything like that, because I wanted to really know the language. I wanted to see what they're putting in their job description so that I could make sure my resume looked like that. When I left my previous position or getting laid off, I had an awesome, sweet severance package. And part of that was a career coach. And so that career coach I still talk to her to this day. She's been with me even with my transition to my new job. So that was definitely a blessing that came with that, leaving my previous position. So I was taken care of when they said budgets got cut, and it was a blessing for me. So really using your people, letting people know that you are looking. I talk to people about, what do you think I'm good at? What are your thoughts? And really picked, the people I trust the most of helping me also figure out what was next for me.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Jessica. I know that we kind of talked about this in terms of like transferable skills and changing your resume to a functional layout, but I want to specifically address, because I've seen this a lot in HR positions, something like a minimum of 5 years in HR experience. Could any of you speak a little bit more to exactly how you can show on your resume that minimum of 5 years when you never had HR in your title and you're kind of making that shift? How did you document that in your resume? And anyone who feels confident speaking to that, I'll allow you to jump in. Does anyone?
I'll chime in for a second. Sorry, I realized I was still on mute. I think that one of the ways that I got over, because I think my job said 5 to 10 years, and I was like, that's a suggestion. And the fact that I had a functional resume, so my actual titles were not highlighted at the top; they're at the bottom of the page. For me, helped because I can demonstrate. I had to really change the language, and by I mean my former student who changed it. He was really challenging me to be like, okay, so if you weren't in education, what would you say? These wouldn't be students; these would be clients. And I was like, you're right. you're right. He really got me to think about how to not speak education in my resume. So, and yes, at the bottom, it has my titles. And frankly, I can't even think if the person who's recruited me looked at that. She was really caught up on the, like, what could I actually prove? Like, what percentage of this increase? When I talked about student conduct cases, I talked about it in terms of employee discipline and performance management. So using some of those words, I believe helped me pull away from the number of years. And I had to remind myself that that's somebody's wish list. They hope somebody has all 5 to 10 years. So I would encourage folks listening, even if it says that apply anyway, you may or may not get it through. But don't let that be the thing that holds you back because it says 10 years. Well, maybe you've been working 10 years and you've supervised people. That's a thing. You probably wrote performance evaluation. You approved somebody's timesheet, very loosely payroll. Like, you just have to finagle it some to get those points across, has been my experience.
Great.
I would add to that, you know, there's things that are easier to teach versus not to teach. So, you know, coming from higher ed, you know, in pretty much any department, any role, everyone has some experience probably with talent acquisition, whether you're hiring RAs or you hired full-time people. You hired somebody, you then trained them. And like Shimina says, you're supervising, you're doing performance management. So I think play up that sort of thing. Play up the talent acquisition stuff, the performance management stuff, the training and development stuff. You can learn payroll and you can learn benefits. You can learn all of those things. So highlight those things that are really in all jobs. You know, the hiring, the training, the holding people accountable.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's the adaptability that I think is the biggest skill set. Your ability to learn in the specific environment that you are put in is something that we can all speak to in student affairs. We all have that ability. And whenever you have had any experience working with or around faculty or with or around graduate students, play that up a lot, because when people hear college students, they think kids. And while we are trained to not, right, to not use that language, that's how a lot of other people see it. And we know that's different, but being able to speak to your work with graduate students or faculty and staff somehow seems to be respected in a different way that is unfortunate, but is something I've certainly experienced.
I'd add one more thing, is demonstrating oh, I'm sorry if I cut somebody off. Demonstrating that you understand the difference between, say, universities and how whatever industry or workplace you're applying for too. One of the questions that was asked of me in my interview with the COO was, he's like, okay, great. You know, I see you've done a ton of stuff with like hiring, but how is hiring at a university different than hiring here? Like, what are you going to do differently? So I had to know, like, what does hiring at a nonprofit look like versus hiring at a university? And so I had to tell him, like, it's going to be quick. Like, you're not bound by, you know, all this structure. And so know what the differences are, because, you know, if you go in, your examples are going to be in a university, but you have to demonstrate that you're adaptable, because wherever you're working, whether it's, you know, private sector, public sector, they're probably not going to be bound by the same structures that the university is bound by. So that would be another thing.
And I just wanted to add with what Carrie said about the faculty piece. So I worked in graduate admissions very closely with faculty members, and that pretty much you can think about as your executives or your CEOs, your presidents, you know, all of those different people, your deans. So just trying to match the lingo as much as you can. That's why I spent a lot of time studying what words, terms were all over LinkedIn, so that I could match. If I said faculty member, it became an executive or a leader, a university exec, or a departmental leader. So being able to kind of try to match your experience with the terms that are in those different job descriptions, and just trying to match as much as you can, because the more that you guys have worked with not only students, but so many different people, making sure you're talking about that you can talk from the employee all the way up into that president of that company. You've done that, or you've done that in the university setting.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I think that that's really useful information for everyone, so I appreciate sharing. So I think this will probably have to be our last question of the panel. We have to have a hard stop at 5:30 Eastern because we're going to get ready to start the next panel at 5:45 Eastern. But I do want to ask you all the highs and lows in your current role. So what is the very best part of your current role and what is the very worst part of your current role? While you're thinking about that, there's a few questions I think didn't get answered fully in the chat. So if you, when you're not speaking, if you have any time, panelists, to go to the chat. I know one question was about if there were any like Facebook groups or Twitter chats or anything like that that you could recommend. Another question that you can speak to either in your answer or in the chat, I think Carrie touched on it a little bit already, but was the ability that you have to drive anti-racism strategies within your organization, if you want to speak to that a little bit. All right, so I think that we will start with Heather on this question. And you're muted, Heather.
And I muted. As soon as I started talking, I realized. In terms of highs, I mean, for me, it's really just where I work. I work for a really, really amazing organization. The leadership is amazing. The communication is amazing. The workplace culture, the people, there's, you know, really high engagement. So it was just such a relief, you know, when I made that career change, just because I had been struggling, you know, in the last couple of years in higher ed. And so it just was so refreshing to me that I could, you know, work someplace that appreciated me and my talents. Like the communication is so clear, the recognition, the appreciation, you know, feeling like you're accomplishing something with, you know, just, you know, people that are cooperative. Like it was just where I work is just great. You know, somebody hit on it before, like it was I couldn't grasp the whole idea of a bonus. You know, the first time I had a big project, I'd only been there a couple months and I finished this huge project and they call me in and they're like, oh, here's a like $500 gift card. And I'm like, what's this for? And they're like, well, you did a good job. And you're just like, what? Because I finished something, I get like $500. Like that to me was just wild. And so just feeling like, you know, everyone is really there to do a good job, wants to do their work. That is the biggest thing. I mean, as it relates specifically to HR, I enjoyed doing a lot of different things. Like for me, I'm somebody, if I had jobs in the past where I just did one thing all day and I was always kind of desperate to for some more variety. And so I like doing a lot of different things at one time. You know, there's kind of a cycle and there's times of the year that I'm really, really busy and I work a ton. And then it like cycles down and I don't have as much on my plate. And so I really enjoy that. But, you know, with a really supportive supervisor, you know, they're encouraging you to take time, like you're working too hard, take time off. You need to, you know, that I didn't get necessarily in previous workplaces. And so just having a supportive supervisor is great. And just better work-life balance and all of that. The low, I think one challenge with being a generalist like I am is that you just have to kind of keep things running. You do the same thing all the time. And so in terms of steps up, like I don't know that there's really ways for me to move up when you're just the sole person. So I feel like if I really wanted to take a big step up career-wise, I really would have to move elsewhere. I mean, I can certainly get raises and get promotions, but it's not really going to change my day-to-day when you're a department of one. I don't have people under me. I don't have people to help me do a lot of the administrative tasks. So that's just the one downside. But I like where I work, so I'm okay with it.
Thanks, Heather. We'll go to Carrie next.
Yeah, so thinking about lows, I certainly miss supervising. That was a big part of what I really loved, especially once I moved into roles where I was supervising full-time staff. I miss that, but I'm doing it in a different way, so I guess I shouldn't miss it as much as I do, but I sure do wish there was a team, and I'm doing a hell of a lot of work for one person, and I think it will be a cold day in hell before they hire someone else. And so I need to get used to being the only one. And so I do wish there was more, a larger team to work within. And certainly from student involvement, every university I was at, there was at least, 3 or 4 of us at least. And there's not many at a much larger team. So I do miss that, especially in the last month. It's been really tough to be a person of color, a woman of color in a field that is primarily white men, primarily white older men. That has been lonely and tough and hard to navigate. But as it leads to a high, there's also so much opportunity for change and huge impact. They are really listening to me in such a really cool way, and not just in the last month. It's been the last year that I've said, you all need diversity and inclusion work. This is important. And I wish I didn't have to be the one to make that happen, but they're giving me all the resources that I need and ask for and want. Our entire list of racial injustice action commitments was literally my dream list that I typed up and sent to the partners, and they said go. And so it's really, really cool to be able to do high impact work, to be able to make the few people of color, the few minorities in the organization, their dreams start to come true a little bit, and the incremental change that they've been wanting to have happen, but haven't had a voice on that management team to let it happen. That's really big for me. And also with my focus being on emotional intelligence, it's getting people to open up and talk about their full vulnerable lives that they just don't do in that industry as an organization, and I'm pushing them to do that. And it's really cool to see folks speak their truth and speak their life in a way that I think we can do in student affairs, especially in student involvement and leadership development. We can get into some sappy shit, y'all, and I love it. I love it. I want them to do it all the time, and I'm able to make that transition happen at an architecture firm. So it's cool to bring that part of what I loved in student affairs over to a whole new industry and feel encouraged to do it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Carrie. I really appreciate that. We'll go to Shimina next.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Highs, I think the fact that no one calls me after like 4:30. No one calls me on the weekend. I don't come back to work on Monday with a whole bunch of emails of people who have been working hard. I don't wake up to a bunch of emails in the day because people are off email and they're doing other things. So that's been an amazing high. And it really has helped me kind of figure out what balance looks like, even though I was nervous the first few days, like I was missing something. The fact that I don't have to have 75 people try to sign off on something to get something done is great. There are 2 signatures that I need, my supervisor, who's the CFOO, and the CEO, and that's it. So that's been really, really great. We've been able to do some things to be responsive to our staff that didn't require union approval or all of these other things. Like we are about to get ready to do like every other Friday off for the next 2 months because we need it and people don't have to use time. So, and I was like, I think we should do this. All the leadership team is on board. What do you think, CEO? And she's like, let me read the email, but I'll probably approve it on Monday. I'm like, great. So those have been some highs there, just about the way that we are able to care for our staff and really take a human approach. I think for me, some of the downsides are like the fact that I have to be honest, like I don't like payroll. I hate payroll. It's super tedious and it needs to be done. And I hate it every month. And we just did payroll 2 days ago. So I'm like, ugh, I'm glad it's over. It's just not fun for me. I appreciate getting paid, but if I didn't have to do it, I wouldn't. And I think being in the nonprofit space, number one, I'm at a well-funded nonprofit. So that's helpful. But we work in a space that can be trauma-inducing because we work with child abuse and families. And right now we're doing work with like police departments. So like having them in the building, or not in the building, but even on meetings, like, and they're in uniform, like it's tough, like to see that. So yeah, that's a hard part right now. But also just being a Black person in a workspace, and half of my leadership team is white, older white women. And yeah, I mean, they're getting it all from me because I'm like, what are we doing? Because I'm not doing this. So that's a little bit tough and it feels a little uncomfortable right now. And that's okay because they need to hear it. And so far they can hear it from me. So I'm like, I will keep saying it.
Great, thank you. And I'm glad that you're saying it. We will move on to Jessica.
I will be quick. So highs is, I love a saying we use is fail fast. I think we know that some things just do not work in higher education, and we know it's not working, but we keep going knowing it's not going to work. So the ability to fail fast, and if that doesn't work, we go on to the next thing. I love the ability to collaborate and take risk a lot more in my position. I have had great supervisors who've just really said, what you got, I'm open to ideas. And they gave me the credit for the idea. I think we've all had that experience where we are trying to make our, directors look awesome. But to get credit, to get the kudos for it is really nice. And just that encouragement to think out of the box so that we can do some really great things. For me, the lows, I started a position like, hello, COVID, it's happening. So starting a new role virtually, especially in a completely new industry in a sense, because I was doing more training and development before this, has been a little bit of a challenge where my team, they're very seasoned. 15, 20 plus years of HR experience. So just trying to not be forgotten about. So I bug them a lot, but they're okay with that. So that has been a really challenge of all the things that's going on in our world right now, and you're starting a new job and trying to focus on trying to be as engaged and have people not forget about you has definitely been a low. I think that's been the biggest thing for me right now is just trying to navigate this world of working. I always have loved remotely. I've had it in both positions, but starting something new and still trying to learn what your job is or what your responsibilities are, that's been a little challenging. And then also we're learning benefits in 401k. Like it's snooze for me. And so Heather, Shimina, I might have to call y'all to, make me feel it, but I'm not feeling it right now. But that has been, our position is going to be focusing on, I now have to do more in the 401k, the more benefits section, and I'm not excited about it. So that's a low this week, but just navigating a new role in COVID and just parts of the job that I'm like, this is boring, but I got to know how to do it. It's in my toolbox now.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Mallory, we'll have you close this question out for us. Highs and lows.
Yeah, so if I'm being honest, I really don't think there's been any lows working for KPMG. I've only been there for 5 months now, but I'm sure there's some day-to-day things that annoy me, but I have to go on a campus and sell students as to why they should come work for KPMG. And a lot of these students that I talk to have multiple offers with either other large finance or public accounting firms. So overall, I knew when I was looking that I wanted to work for a large company like this. And they've really proved it to me through the COVID situation. So like we probably have a call at least once a week where national leadership gets on the phone and tells us what's going on. And they're pretty honest with us too. So I've really appreciated the fact that they are really transparent and making us feel better about our jobs and the work that we're doing and constantly telling us how great of a job we're doing. And, today is my last day for the next week. We're shutting down for a full week. They call it summer shutdown. And, they tell everybody you're done. We'll see you in a week. This doesn't come out of your PTO, which is a very generous offer. But ultimately, working with the students too on the other side is our model is an intern to hire. So when I talk to, typically it's sophomores or juniors, and call them and let them know they've gotten an offer, that's really them potentially starting their career. So it's really a great opportunity to have built a relationship with a student and then to give them great news that they're able to start this new career and something that they've really worked hard to is something that I really love that you do really get in campus recruiting is you're still boots on the ground, talking with students constantly. I have a LinkedIn, the amount of invites I get from students, emails coming in, and just, a really great way to connect with them a lot.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. This has been such a useful panel. I appreciate all of your contributions. Anything that you want to make sure that we share before we close this out? Is there anything that you didn't get to you think that people watching this need to know?
Don't be afraid to ask someone for an informational interview. People love to talk about themselves, and just asking for 30 minutes of time, especially people who used to be in student affairs, we got into the field because we want to help people. So we tend to not mind talking to you a bit.
Thanks, Carrie.
I would say I'm imagining to a degree, because my wife still works at the university. It can feel, right now, higher ed may feel a bit like a sinking ship. And you're like, should I jump? The answer is yes. And there's a point at which you will move through the, like, they need me. They will replace you in your role. They will replace the role. They cannot replace you, the person, but know that there is a space outside of education that is waiting for you. They will be fine. They will pay somebody else to do the job. Your students will be fine. So I remind some folks that I coach now about that are in higher ed. I'm like, they will be fine. I promise you they will be fine. But you will not be fine if you continue to like stay in the space where you are clearly unhappy. And if you're asking the question, should I go now? Again, the answer is yes.
Great. Thank you, Shimina.
I'll say I've also loved working for places that actually have HR practices that are best practices, and they're very fair and they treat employees as much as they can in the way that employees should be treated. So that's something that I've just really loved seeing moving out of higher education.
Awesome.
I
Thank you.
take all of my experiences from higher ed with me, and so like that's what kind of propels me sometimes to make my workplace better, to have better hiring, to have better supervision, to have like everything I experience is what motivates me to make it better where I am. And it's my personal mission is to like give HR a good name. HR has such a bad reputation. You see, even in the group, everyone's like, HR is just there for the employer. I'm like, no, maybe a bad HR person is, but a good HR person really wants the employees to do well. You know, like, there's good HR people out there. So it's my personal mission to like do everything I can really well and be really there for the employees. So people don't think HR is the enemy.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, Sean said in the group, this panel has been everything. I fully agree. Thank you all so much for being here. This has been recorded. I will post it over the weekend for folks to catch later. So Shimina, Carrie, Jessica, Heather, Mallory, thank you so much for volunteering your time to be here. I hope you're reading the chat and all of the positive things that are coming in. You all are making a huge difference right now in a time when our field needs it. So thank you, thank you. And at this time, I'm going to kick everyone back to the waiting room. We do have another panel that's going to start at 5:45 Eastern. So hopefully many of you will stay on with us there. It's the learning and development, instructional design, curriculum, and leadership development, I think is another one there too. So we'll see everyone who's sticking around for that one in a little bit, but everyone else, please have a wonderful evening and a great weekend.